Hi, I'm Dom from Solida. Today we'll be talking about Notion's new Q&A feature, which is this little button here on the bottom right of the window. And it's really revolutionized how I interact with Notion for my work and personal life. Before we go any further though, I would just like to note that it's still in beta, so I will point out any areas where it can improve as we go along. But by going into this bar in the bottom right, you can query anything that you have access to within your Notion workspace. So in this video, I'm going to go over 3 use cases for Notion Q&A that I use on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. So I'm going to ask it, what tasks do I have today? So you can see it gives me a few different pieces of information over and above kind of just telling me what tasks I have today. It's telling me that I've actually completed one of the tasks, which is interesting actually, because when I was writing the script for this video, one of the things I mentioned is that it didn't pick up when a task was complete and just told you all of the tasks you had due for today. But it looks like that's maybe changed since I last looked at it, which is cool. And then it tells me what tasks I have ongoing, one of which includes making this video, and then I have another task relating to migrating over to Google Suite. And you also see there are these numbers here, and basically, on top of actually giving the answer, it tells you what pages, so you can click this little button to expand and see what pages it looked at to pull this answer together, and then it references them. So you can see here, this is a link to the task I have in my database, so that you can kind of dig a bit deeper into the answer it's given you, and also so you can just sort of reference it to make sure it's correct, which is really, really handy. And to level this one up a bit, you can use any tags that you have on your specific task to make the question a bit more specific. So for example, you could say, what sales and marketing tasks do I have this week? So that's sales and marketing is a specific tag I have in my task database. And so again, it picks up this video, which falls under sales and marketing, and it tells me the span of the task, and then says that there aren't any specific tasks related to that tag outside of the one that it's mentioned, which is really, really useful. It's a really powerful use case if you have a well-organized workspace, like I do at the moment. I've kind of reorganized it, and now I find that the Q&A answers are much better because I've organized it really well. One thing that can be frustrating that I found when I first wanted to search Q&A for my daily tasks is that I'd recently archived a Teamspace as part of a kind of overhaul of my workspace that I'm doing. And that Teamspace had a task database, and Q&A was digging these up and then presenting them to me. Similarly, it can't always tell that a task has been checked off, or at least doesn't seem to necessarily be consistently able to tell that. But one thing you can do is you can use these thumbs to tell Notion if a particular answer is good or bad. And that feedback will be really important for improving this tool in the future, given that it is still in beta. So ignoring archived information seems like an obvious fix. So if you encounter that issue, definitely give it a thumbs down, and it will kind of prompt you to provide a bit more information. My workaround if this does happen to you, especially with archived information, is to follow the reference, so this number here, to the archived database and fully delete it. That did seem to solve the problem for me. So the next use case is knowledge management. And I think this is probably the one that people have been talking about, at least for me anyway. It's really forced me to reconsider how ubiquitous Notion is in my workflow. Until now, while I did use Notion for a lot of things, I still relied heavily on Apple Notes for really quick notes that I didn't really think were worth bringing up Notion to do, especially notes I added on my phone. And then some things were also on, Word documents or in spreadsheets. Now, though, having everything in Notion means that you never have to search for anything ever again. It's like having your own personal search engine that just references all of the internal workings that you've created. So it's really now convinced me to try and store as much as possible in Notion. So what I do is I have a database called Documents. And I store a bunch of information. I pretty much now store all my documents in this database. And the idea is that over time, I can then ask it any question, and it should be in my documents. If it's something I've ever bothered to write anything down about, it should be in my documents. So I can use it to get quick summaries of things that maybe sit across multiple different notes or sit in notes I can't quite remember the name of. So, let's just give it an example. So I can say, what is my business plan? And it provides me a really neat summary of my business plan without me having to go into the document and find it. And certainly, this will be much more summarized than the document that I have, which is a big, long, typed up thing. If I just want to quickly access it, this is more than enough. Another one is I can ask it, what is my plan for market validation? And again, it's pulled, a bunch of different notes that I have about market validation, and it's just put them into one concise summary, which is really easy to access, and it's really helpful. Sometimes you can make multiple notes about the same thing and sort of forget, where they are, and you lose that information forever. Whereas here you don't, because it's pulling together everything about it. And then another cool thing is you can use it before you kind of go into a specific situation. So if I'm going into a meeting with a client and they're going to be asking me about some of Notion's most recent features, for example, I can say, what is some of my recent Notion learning? And here you can see, there's a bunch of different references, different notes I've taken, and I can just go into each one of those and pull out all the relevant information that I need. Really, really useful. So something that is a little frustrating at the moment is that Q&A can't read embedded information. So one example that I kind of came across recently is I mapped out my client onboarding process on Figma and I embedded it into Notion. So it sits here in this Figma document, and I wanted to just kind of quickly get an understanding of what my client onboarding process was. So I asked Q&A, but it can't read the Figma document itself. It does actually give me quite a decent answer. So let me just ask it now and you'll be able to see. And it's also interesting to note in this one where it gets the information from to provide the answer. So you can see it's looking at different discovery calls. It's looking at my payment details. It's looking at a bunch of different stuff. And it's figured out that the onboarding process begins with a discovery call. What happens in the discovery call, which is pulled from my discovery call template. All of this actually is specific to the template. And then it mentions sending a booking fee, which I guess it's pulled from payment details. It shows I then create a client portal. It's impressively accurate, I have to say, and does provide a good summary. It would be a perfect response, though, if it could look into that Figma document. But I appreciate that as a whole extra layer of complexity, and also, I guess, from an API standpoint, would involve having to go and interact with Figma's API, which, I probably is, at least for now, not going to be possible. So it is something to be aware of, that Q&A can only query the notes that you actually have in Notion as opposed to embedded information. Nevertheless, it is a revolutionary feature when it comes to knowledge management, especially if you do use Notion as your primary repository of information. The final use case is, I guess, a personal one, and it is kind of specific to me, but I thought it was a cool non-business use case that I wanted to share. So I track all of my workouts in Notion. I have a fitness tracker, and these are all the different days I do in the gym every week. And it's cool because I can specifically and quickly review what exercise I've done today or what I have coming up, which is really useful. So I can ask it, what gym exercises did I do today? And it pulls out the list. Or, a more useful one, because I can obviously remember what ones I did today, is I can ask it what I did yesterday. And, the more accurate the prompt is that you give it, the better the response will be. And this is a really good example of that. So, interesting enough, sometimes when you just give it a kind of really basic prompt, it will automatically kind of add more color to the response. But then sometimes it doesn't do that. So I think it's one of those things where you just get better over time at figuring out what level of detail you want and how to provide a prompt that elicits that kind of response. But nevertheless, really helpful use case. So that wraps up this video. I hope those examples of Notion Q&A were useful to you. And if you've had a chance to try them out already, let me know in the comments what cool use cases you've come up with. Thanks for watching.